I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
And I'm Rachel Laird.
And I'm Amy Pelletier.
And we're playing Politeness Roulette in the Great Concavity.
Nice. So hey, Matt Booker, we're back for episode 19 with some very special guests. As you can tell, one of them is my wife, Rachel, and the other one is Amy Pelletier, one of her very best friends in the world. And unfortunately, we couldn't connect with you for the conversation, so it's going to be kind of like one of those conference interview type ones from our previous episode.
Yeah, I really wish that I could have been there for that. It's a really great conversation, and I'm just really sad that I could not be there to be part of it. Yeah. But it's a fantastic conversation, actually.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it and found some good stuff in it. We don't want to spoil too much, so we'll kind of just let it speak for itself, I guess.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. But we will do a few housekeeping things at the start of the episode here, and then we'll set you into that conversation. So first of all, Matt, I guess a cool thing to talk about is that we just finished our very first contest on the Great Concavity, and we announced a winner.
It was a picture which you can still see on our website, and we link to it on Facebook and on
Twitter and Instagram and all of the things.
And you were in that picture?
I was, yeah. I was, as well as many of our guests from episode 17 from the conference, because we were all like staying in a big house together, and it was absolute riot. So our winner was, so it was a caption contest for that photo where we reenacted Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, but we were at Dairy Queen, so we had like blizzards and ice cream treats instead of like, a meal. And so you guys, our listeners, a lot of you sent in some fantastic entries for captioning that photo, and we want to thank everyone who did that and who participated. Had a great time just laughing at everything that came in. But we had a winner, and we sent him a full set of Chris Ayres' Infinite Jest film posters. And Chris Ayres, who's been on our show a couple times, generously donated those. So thanks again, Chris, for that. And our winner was John Spear from Montana, and he goes by Theoretical Dentist on Twitter and Instagram. And Matt, what was his caption?
His caption says, "Although, of course, you end up becoming the Lord's 12," which I thought was perfect. So
good. Yeah, you really nailed it there, John. And we did have so many good entries that it was really hard for us to pick, like a lone winner. So we're gonna go through some of our other favorites that came in too. I think would be appropriate. Would you say?
Yeah. There was a bunch of good entries. I mean, I would say we got dozens upon dozens of good entries, and most of them were like Theoretical Dentist, and that they combined the Wallace element with the religious element, which somehow has kind of become a theme on our show. It's like Wallace and religion, kind of. We didn't plan that, but we didn't. We just keep coming back to it. Yeah. And one of my favorites was Lisa Holton, and she said, "Take this, it is both my flesh and not." I thought that was great.
So good. And Lisa, of course, was on episode 17.
Right. She was at the conference.
Who spoke about the Gothic in Infinite Jest. Yeah, that was a great one. Another awesome one, which was like, oh man, it's so close, was Rudy Kushner. Iscariot to Jesus. Te occidere possent sed te edere non possent nefas est. Which, Matt, what's the Latin translation in Infinite Jest?
They can kill you, but the politics of eating you are somewhat dicier.
Yeah, the legalities of eating you are somewhat dicier, which in the context of communion and the Last Supper is absolutely hilarious. So yeah, Jesus, they can kill you, but the legalities of eating your flesh, which is both flesh and not, are much dicier. So some really clever combinations of Wallacean stuff with the religious stuff. So well done, Lisa and Rudy. Sorry you didn't get the posters, but top shelf stuff right there.
That one was good, and also one of the founders of the website The Millions, C. Max McGee, he wrote in with one. It was a reference to Infinite Jest about how the milk was powdered. He's like, I'm telling you, man, it's powdered milk.
Yeah, this milk is powdered.
Which, here's a little fun fact is that when I was growing up for about a year, my dad owned a Dairy Queen.
Really?
Yeah.
You're the luckiest kid on the block, man.
And that was during the time where Dairy Queen had a partnership, a branding partnership with like Dennis the Menace.
Oh yeah, those were good days. And I love those days.
So we brought home a lot of like popsicles and ice cream and stuff that was Dennis the Menace branded. But I'm telling you, man, the little known secret about their ice cream is just like comes in a bag.
Yeah, it's like
and
oil, like high percentage of just oil, right?
They just dump it in from a liquid bag.
Yeah, it's unsettling. Also, Amy Pelletier on this episode, she actually used to like manage a Dairy Queen back like in her teen years. So she would like tell us stories like that too about the ingredients of your ice cream, which nevertheless are still delicious, if you can get over that mental hurdle. But
another creepy thing is that it was very similar looking to the gravy that was served.
Oh no.
It was served with like the toast and the chicken
biscuits.
Fingers.
Oh, that's bad. Yeah.
It was like the gravy or ice cream is like just depends on how much you freeze it.
Oh, that's quite abject to think about.
So, but I still to this day I love me some Dairy Queen.
Oh man, it's so good. You guys in the States had Snickers Blizzards forever, and
yes.
we didn't have those in Canada. So anytime I go down to Washington, I'll make a pretty like strong case for us going to a Dairy Queen drive-through to get Snickers Blizzards.
Oh, that's funny.
Two other really good entries we had. One was from Christina Wilson, and her caption was, "Good old Leon, Ardo da Vinci," in brackets, which is good. And then Rob Boyce, the Da Vinci Cone.
That was good.
Nice Dan Brown reference there. So thanks again to everyone who submitted. That was fun. I hope we get to do another contest in the future, Matt. We'll keep that in mind. Send us your ideas if you have contest ideas that we can do.
Absolutely. And I want to send a special shout out back to Christina Wilson, and that she and I go way back.
Oh, really? Cool.
I still consider her, she's one of my good friends.
Oh, rad.
Much love to Christina if you're listening.
That's awesome. Cool. And speaking of shout outs, is that a word that, I hear a lot of podcasters say shout out.
That's a true thing. That's a radio thing.
Yeah. So we have some of those, if you like that term. A few people that have been like emailing us and connecting a lot with us on Twitter and stuff lately. We always love that. So what's up to E.F. Bartlam, who we've had a lot of back and forth lately about some interesting stuff. Someone on Twitter named Sandoval. Her name's Becky. She's from Portland. I've learned that from her Instagram. Her and I have been talking about music quite a bit through Twitter, particularly a band called Kishi Bashi. And then so the guy from Kishi Bashi has played in a band called Of Montreal.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And so Kevin Barnes, who's the frontman of that band, has talked about how he's a fan of David Foster Wallace. So we were back and forth about that. So that was cool. And then we got a really cool series of emails from Carolee Wolf as well. That also included Rob Short, too.
I kind of went overboard on replying to Carolee and just kind of gave my whole life story out there. But
yeah, that was great. I love that.
She had some great emails of her own, and just special shout out to Carolee Wolf.
Yeah, totally. And then we had some good interaction with Jonah Stutz as well on email.
Absolutely.
And through that, Matt, I learned that you have met quite a few interesting people face to face, which I did not know about. So I knew that you had met David Foster Wallace before in person several times. And then you told me recently that you met Don DeLillo in person one time, and my brain exploded. And like, Dawn, if you're somehow miraculously listening to this, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. That would be like the ultimate dream come true.
That would be true.
Short of like having the ghost of David Foster Wallace come on and talk. And so you've also met Jacques Derrida.
Yeah, and the thing is, Derrida and Wallace and Updike, a lot of these people were heroes of mine, and they're now gone. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it a little more poignant for me, and I feel old when I talk about it.
Yeah, but the Earth is very old, like Lyle says.
Vonnegut is another one, like Kurt Vonnegut.
Yep.
I met him in Denver.
Oh, cool.
And my older brother was with me on almost all of these occasions where we usually at a university got to spend a day with someone. But there were some other writers and people involved in that I did get to meet and spend time with.
Yeah.
That I still treasure those times. Mm-hmm. And one was also a Nobel Prize winner who is gone now, named Czesław Miłosz. And he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1980. And he was just a phenomenal presence. I got to spend a day with him and kind of ferry him around Denver.
Cool.
So you're right in that I feel really old just that I've got to meet a lot of people.
But you're not even 40 yet, so you're not old.
A few more weeks and I'll be 40. So I'm coming up close on that.
In 3 weeks, you'll be old.
I'm facing that midlife crisis for like the past 20 years.
Yeah, I'm coming up on 34 in a couple months, and that's like, okay, now I'm in my mid-30s at 34, and that's not far away from 40, so I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's tough, and I mean, you get to that point where you start realistically thinking there's more days behind you than ahead of you.
Oh, that's bleak.
That is bleak, right?
Yeah,
but then, you also think, who's my favorite living writer? And most of my adult life, it was David Foster Wallace. Right. And then he's not living. Right. And then, like I say, a few months later, my number 2 was John Updike, and then he died. Mm. And then I really got to go to the bench.
Who's 3? Would it be DeLillo? Would that be your favorite living author?
He was
now?
never really in my top 10. I mean, Nicholson Baker is up there for me. I really like Nicholson Baker. Bolaño, of course. Bolaño's dead. Sure, of course.
Yeah. You never met him, though.
I never met him. I really didn't read him until after he was dead.
Okay. Yeah.
But I struggle with that now. Like, it matters very much to me. Is that person living or not?
Yeah.
It's a different relationship you have with them if they're alive.
Right. Yeah. I had a friend. I can't remember who it was. Someone said to me once that they won't read an author unless they've been dead for like 100 years.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
No, I super don't agree with that. But it's an interesting thought that like their work has to stand the test of time before I'll consider it.
Well, and I actually knew someone like that who was a very hardcore Catholic.
Oh, yeah.
And they just didn't really want to live in the world of men, and they wanted to live in the world of like God.
Interesting.
And to them,
had they read Flannery O'Connor, because that's an interesting marriage there between Catholicism and literature.
I don't think that this is the type of Catholic who would read Flannery O'Connor.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, speaking of Catholics who read Flannery O'Connor, Michael O'Connell, who was a guest on our conference episode, we had a good long talk about Flannery O'Connor, and he told me about how he went to a Flannery O'Connor conference once, and it was like the weirdest mix of people, but like super rad. It's like all these like quite a bit older women that were like pretty like staunch Catholics, but who were also just really edgy and rad. They were like no bullshit kind of ladies, just probably like Flannery was.
Yeah, and one of my mentors in college was a major Flannery O'Connor scholar, and really through her I got a major appreciation of Flannery O'Connor. And I still think she's one of the best writers of the 20th century.
Sure.
But, back to your point, as I still struggle with like, who is my favorite living writer? Mm-hmm. And to me, it does matter if like this person and I share the same breath, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, up there for me, another one I neglected to mention a minute ago is Ben Lerner. I really like Ben Lerner.
Oh, yeah.
And he only has a couple of novels, a couple of books of poetry, and now a new book of poetry, essays out now called The Hatred of Poetry. And it's really hard to say. Like, I feel like a cliche even saying sometimes, oh, I like Wallace and Bolaño and Updike and Ben Lerner. And it's really cool to say, like, well, I will say another one that's not in that mold, who's a literary hero of mine, who is alive, is Maggie Nelson.
I don't know.
And then if you haven't read Maggie Nelson,
I have not.
Go pick up.
Tell me where to go.
Go pick up any of her books.
Okay.
They're all phenomenal.
Read.
But especially Bluets and The Argonauts. I think both those books are probably her two best.
Okay. Awesome.
But so I do have other like non-traditional literary heroes.
John Grisham.
No.
I've read everything, right?
I've read a lot of John Grisham. I've read a lot of Stephen King. I've read a lot of Lawrence Sanders is another like favorite of mine, but not heroes.
Okay. That's cool. I like that you can make that distinction. I've read and enjoyed their work, but
that's where I draw the line.
There's a special pedestal. Yeah, awesome. And you also, and then in that email, going back to the Jonah email, you also met Jürgen Habermas, Julia Kristeva, Gayatri Spivak, Edward Said. Like that's a pretty sweet cast of characters, man.
It's true, and I've also met
Jonathan Lethem last year at the Texas book.
Jonathan Lethem and Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
And Cornell West, I spent some time with. So, I mean, I feel like I've met a lot of writers who I respect, and that's really important to me. But to me, it's, I'm still the one with a podcast about David Foster Wallace.
Yeah. Like he's the only author that you would be willing to commit many hours of your life to talking about on a podcast.
Isn't that kind of weird?
Yeah. I'd probably say the same. I mean, like, I'd happily, if I wasn't doing this podcast, because it takes up enough time, would do a podcast about like contemporary U.S. literature or something. I could do that. But like to do like a whole podcast dedicated to one author, I think this would be it for me.
Yeah, man, it's just a weird combination of the way it's worked out, like with reputations and sort of my interests in things. But the interest in Wallace and talking about his work hasn't waned a bit for me in 20 years.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at, and I really enjoyed this episode, and I know you will too.
Nice. Well, welcome everybody to episode 19. We're almost at 20 of The Great Concavity. And we're joined today by two very special guests, one of which is my very good friend, Amy Pelletier, who, Amy, your name has made it on the show before.
So I've been told.
Yeah. And Rachel, you are married to me.
Sure, that's my claim to fame.
So like, how's that been? I guess it could be a first question.
How's been that decade?
We'll just pass on.
Yeah, almost a decade. So we're almost at episode 20, and we're almost at a decade. So
of marriage.
So we're of marriage, and
two big milestones.
Two big milestones coming up pretty soon, guys. Well, it's great to have you both on. Thanks for taking the time out. We are talking today about what it's like to read Infinite Jest for the first time. Both of you recently completed reading Infinite Jest, so congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And we've had guests on the show before that are like academic experts or artists or various other people who've dealt with Wallace's work, and usually Infinite Jest in some significant way. And we also are getting a lot of listeners, it seems like, who are just starting to get into Wallace and are just reading Infinite Jest or just have read Infinite Jest for the first time. So we get to talk about sort of what's it like to be a new Infinite Jest reader, and what your experience has been like of that, and what has it signified, what has it meant for you, and where does that end up in the end, I suppose. So that's our jam today.
Yeah, especially because we're both definitely not experts, literary or really otherwise.
Just regular folk.
Regular folk, but you guys are, well educated and like, middle-ish class and have some privilege and things like that, I guess.
We do have privilege,
So maybe tell us a bit about your educational background and then how you came to reading this book. Amy, you go first.
All right. My educational background, I have my undergraduate degree in political science and mostly studied gendered poverty and gendered violence. I'm now studying naturopathic medicine. I came to this book through you, as so many have. Also very hesitantly. I didn't tell you I was reading it for 200 plus pages out of shame that perhaps I wouldn't finish.
Was it your first foray into the novel?
It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you haven't started and quit in the past?
I had not been willing
like
to
so
start
many others.
out of contrariness up to this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. No one puts Amy in a corner.
No one.
And so the gendered poverty stuff that you mentioned may have been a theme in Infinite Jest, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That seems to be an issue that is significant to both of you, so wait for that. And Rachel, yourself.
Yeah, my educational background is my master's degree is in human security and peace building. Amy and I share a lot of similar interests in kind of social justice and development work. And I work in community development around mental health. I also came to this book through you.
You don't say.
I don't think you can be married to Dave Laird and not eventually read Infinite Jest.
Yeah, that's a deal breaker.
Yeah, there's a claim that Dave made in his thesis or
the Infinite Winter,
the Infinite Winter post. That's right, where he said he didn't feel he could be fully known by someone who had not read the book.
Oh yeah, I read that. I thought that was funny. I was like, oh, good thing I'm reading this.
Yeah. Well, good thing I read it. I wasn't reading it at that point yet, and I said, well, I feel like I know you pretty well, but I guess every little bit helps.
Because you would edit my posts before I posted them, and then I think your mom read that, and she has recently read Infinite Jest too, and she was like, oh, that's a pretty bold claim, Dave. And you were kind of a little bit nonplussed by that.
Well, I thought it was audacious.
It's audacious, for sure. But, I mean, after you read this book, do you feel like there's something about it that, I don't know, maybe it worms its way into your psyche in some really significant way that you can find solidarity with other people who've read it to be able to talk about it, and some of the things that, I mean, maybe it's a bit too fresh for that, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very compelling, and it is the experience of reading it, because I think it can be daunting and it can feel like a accomplishment to finish it, does unite you in a way with other readers of the book. Like, I think there's a little bit of a solidarity around, like,
in suffering.
We've both made this literary accomplishment by getting through this book. So I can understand in that way it kind of is like a collective shared accomplishment that is nice to have with others, especially those that you love and have a relationship with.
Yeah, cool.
I'll give you credit for that.
Oh, well, that's good. That's great. So, Rach, we've talked about on the show how you are really the architect of the Great Concavity podcast. It was you incepted the idea, essentially, on a road trip last year, and you were like, well, if there's no podcast about Wallace, why don't you just make one? And I said, well, I mean, who am I to do that? And you were like, well, somebody's got to, so might as well be you. And I said, yeah, okay. And thus began. So thanks for that, Rach. Sure. We appreciate that. Tell us a bit about your guys' sort of literary proclivities. What are some of your favorite books, authors, and then maybe we can talk about that in relation to Wallace.
Okay. Well, my favorite book is History of Love by Nicole Krauss.
Yeah.
I also really like... I really like The Convalescent, which I know Rachel just finished.
Yeah, by Jessica Anthony. We just talked about that. We talked about that on a previous episode.
Oh, okay.
That book, yeah. Briefly.
You love Chris Adrian?
I do love Chris Adrian. He's probably my favorite.
Yeah. Children's Hospital.
God's Grief.
Yep.
I also really like YA fiction. So
not that there's anything wrong with that.
I like a broad spectrum of literary delights.
Oh, yes.
I love a lot of like vampire fiction.
Yep.
So being in school and being able to just kind of consume YA too, right?
Yeah,
easy,
I like
stuff
easy just drivel.
Yeah.
It just
if your brain's working so hard in one way, it's kind of like binging a television show.
It's like watching Vampire Diaries.
Yeah.
And then there's a bit of gothic stuff in your interest area, which, I mean, in Infinite Jest, we have wraiths. There's James Incandenza's ghost, which haunts the novel. And so that stuff's not totally foreign in Wallace either. There was someone on the last episode I talked to who gave a presentation at the conference about Infinite Jest and the Gothic.
Oh,
and looking at like
that'd be cool.
various bodily fluids that are abject and many other things in that related field. Lisa Holden, so that was cool. Great. How about you, Rach? What's your
lots of
what
similar.
Are your jams?
I also love Nicole Krauss and History of Love, of course. I love Jonathan Safran Foer.
Whose new book we bought today at the bookstore.
New book I'm excited
Downtown in Victoria.
To get into. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie Ngozi. Sorry, I'm mixing up the name because I'm flustered about being on the podcast.
It's right there on our shelf. We can see
I can look over my
right
shoulder and be like, what are the books that I like to read?
I haven't read it
yet. Jeffrey Eugenides.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say those.
Marriage Plot, very Wallacean stuff in there.
Yeah, Middlesex, Virgin Suicides.
Yep.
Generally enjoyed everything I've read by him. So
cool. And you've read some Wallace in the past. Some of the nonfiction.
I have read some of it. I have read Consider the Lobster. That's really the only thing I truly read by him. I think before this, I think maybe every once in a while you would flag one of the short stories or something from a collection, but I haven't read actually a complete collection before other than that one. Yeah. And
Amy, is this your first?
Yeah, I had never read anything by Wallace before this.
All right.
So, dive in head first.
That's right. And when people ask me what should I, if people are interested in Wallace, they're like, what should I read first? I always think you should read Infinite Jest first. But I know that's kind of a tall order for a lot of people, especially if I know that they're not necessarily inclined towards really massive novels. Usually I'll say check out Supposedly Fun Thing, where he goes on the cruise ship, or Consider the Lobster, the title essay, and that stuff's a bit more bite-size, pun intended, I guess, with the lobster. But Infinite Jest, I think, is I read it first. It was the first thing I read, and then because of that, I was just I have to read everything this guy's ever written, because it did something so profound in me that I had to get everything else.
Yeah. I think I'd be much more inclined to read his stuff now than if I had read his other stuff and then had Infinite Jest on the line. I think I would just take forever.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
I agree.
So, you read the book quite fast, Amy, 6 weeks, I think.
Is that one of the fastest you've ever heard of?
It's the shortest it's ever taken me is 3 months, and I've read it twice at 3 months.
Technically, it really only took me 4 weeks of hard reading with a 200-page chunk a month and a half before that took 2 weeks. So, 6 weeks, but
but you could improve on that time.
4 real hard weeks. Yeah.
4 challenging, in-depth weeks at Ennett House and the ETA. And Rach, how about you? Read over Infinite Winter?
I did. I started a bit late on Infinite Winter. I think I was a couple weeks behind, 2 weeks behind or something when they got started. And I finished a week after I think Infinite Winter wrapped up. So it was about however long that period of time was, about 3 months or so. Yeah.
And you were totally cruising for the first month. You were way ahead of the reading schedule.
Yeah, well, that was when we went to Nicaragua, and so we were often in places where there wasn't internet or things to distract me, and it was perfect for getting over that initial hump of, do I want to be doing this? This is a lot of work, and I'm trying to put the pieces together in my mind. And I think from that point on, I was hooked, and I had lots of opportunity to read, so that helped kind of propel me forward. And then when we got back from there, I was into more regular life, but it was so helpful to have the Infinite Winter kind of schedule to try to keep up with. That was really motivating. Yeah.
So thanks to Mark Flanagan and the whole gang for keeping us going over those few months there, and that. It's cool. Rach, was this your first attempt reading Infinite Jest?
It was not my first attempt. No, I did try to read it. I can't remember how many years ago it was now. but it could have been at least 3 probably, right? Like,
yeah, maybe more. Maybe
it was before you'd started your master's, and but you'd read it and you loved it, and I knew I wanted to read it, and just started and totally didn't grab me. Felt like too much work. And,
how far did you make it?
I think I made it to 150 pages, maybe 200, but it was I wasn't going at a pace. I think that was my biggest blocker, was like, I feel if people are talking to me about reading this book, it's like, just plow through, just try to get some momentum going so that you kind of can carry that on, because then when you're hooked, you're hooked. But at first, if you're going too slow and you're just doing a couple pages like every day, it's not enough to grab you, and you just feel like you're kind of drowning in it, I think. So yeah, so I abandoned ship and then returned to it years later.
Yeah, to my great chagrin, right?
Yeah,
just
absolutely. My biggest failing as a wife, walking away from Infinite Jest. I'll take it. I'll
Cruel
take that as
universe. No. So what was the TSN turning point for you this time reading it? At what point did you feel like, okay, the hooks are in and they're in deep enough that I'm going to finish this thing out? Do you remember a moment where that happened for you guys?
I think getting to page, what is it, 223, 224?
223 is the list of subsidized time, yeah.
It just finally felt like, I can do this. I can understand what's happening. Like, I already at that point, I think I was pretty into it, but I was still confused by, like, where the pieces were fitting together in the timeline. And then seeing that, I didn't think he was ever going to give us that sweet little treat. So that was when I knew I could make it.
Yeah. Did you find yourself flipping backwards a little bit?
Yeah.
Like, now I can try and puzzle through.
Yeah.
Okay, Year of Glad is the first thing. Okay, so that's last. And then, Year of Depend Adult Undergarment seems to be the main action. But there's all these little moments in between that are, what's BS, 1960? Like, okay, before subsidized time. Yeah, okay, yeah, all that.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the click for you. Yeah. Rach, how about for you this time?
Yeah, people talk about that being the point where it clicks for them, but for me, I don't think that was my biggest struggle, was the timeline. I actually found I didn't even really refer back to it that much, because, and maybe I would in a second read. I don't know if I could say what page or what part. I think I found Don Gately to be the most compelling character for like the one I was most interested in. So when they started revisiting him, or he started revisiting him in a more regular way, I think that was for me like what pulled me in a bit more, because it sort of, and I may be piecing this together wrong because it's been a few months, but it was kind of like they get like his beginning of his story with the break-in and everything like that, but then you didn't really see much of Don for a while after that. And I think when he started to come back into the story, I was more interested in getting to his parts of the book, but then everything else kind of started to become more interesting for me as well.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. So you've come to the end of this book. The ending is kind of ambiguous, perhaps. How did you guys process the final page of Don Gately out on the freezing sand and the tide way out? Like, at that moment, were you just like, that's a really satisfying ending? Were you like, what the hell? What am I supposed to make of that?
Yeah, I think I was prepared in that I knew enough to know it wasn't going to be like all the pieces coming together in a really clean way. So I would have been more disappointed had that been what I was expecting, because it seemed so clear that it was building in that way. Like the storylines were starting to come together, characters were starting to come this close to meeting each other, and but I wasn't expecting that. So I think I was not as disappointed, and so I was satisfied with the ending. I think I was left feeling a little bit like I wanted to know how Gately got from that rock bottom to where when we see him, a year or so later, like at Infinite House and as a staffer, and what that initial recovery looked like, even though we see glimpses of it throughout, but kind of what's like that immediate journey between the beach but I was fine with the ending.
Yeah, so you read that moment as kind of his rock bottom, and then that's his transition point into recovery in Infinite House. Cool.
Yeah, I wasn't disappointed by it either. I didn't expect it to fit together as like the page numbers got higher, and it just, you could see you didn't have enough space anymore.
I remember thinking that too.
There's no way this is coming together. I have lots and lots of questions, and I have so many things that I want to know what happened, but because it was so big, it just felt like it would do the whole book a disservice if it had cleaned itself up nicely at the end. Like, it's just this massive snapshot on these people's lives, and it doesn't finish, so the book shouldn't kind of finish. So yeah, it didn't bother me at all.
Because life is kind of that way in a sense. I mean, it ends, but like, you have a long time sometimes before that happens.
And there was
it keeps on,
their story keeps going.
It keeps on going. It keeps being messy and broken, and then redeemed, and all these different things will happen over the span of someone's life. And so if we're getting this shot, it doesn't mean that everything's gonna. It's just a snapshot. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
A moment in time.
I wanted more
November
Tennis Academy.
YDA.
Yeah, you loved the tennis.
Okay, so let's talk about favorite characters maybe then.
Michael Pemulus.
Mike, the Peemster. Yeah, nobody's fool.
So funny.
Fears the dealer's Brutus, the eater of cheese, the rat. Yeah, I'm a big Peemster fan as well.
Yeah, he's the best. He's so funny. Everything he did, I laughed so hard. I still, every time I think about the Visine urine dispensers, I just think it's so funny. Mario just walking around videotaping him.
He's like, we were talking the other day about how he's so paranoid of like people phone calling.
Please
commit a crime. Oh goodness me, all that stuff. But then he's like fine with Mario like filming him like dispensing these urine samples. I think the reason is because it says that like he knows that no one else will see this footage except for Mario himself.
Yeah.
So he's like,
because people just are like, Mario is kind of like, he's so, I think, beloved in a way, but also invisible in so many ways. And I think people don't like almost do him a disservice by like thinking he's insignificant, or something like that. Like, I just think, it's like, oh, it was inconsequential that Mario is filming this.
Right.
Like, nothing will come of it or whatever else, right?
Yeah.
But really, like, so dumb.
On episode 13, we had Rob Short, a friend of ours, on the show. He's a Wallace scholar from Florida, and his intro to the show was, "You're in trouble, you're in luck. This is the great concavity."
So good.
Yeah.
So good.
And a friend of mine made that joke back in, like, I don't know, 1999 or something, but I'm pretty sure he had never read this book, so I wonder if he independently thought of "You're in luck" with a U. Because it was in the context of like getting stung by a jellyfish. It's like, oh, you have to pee? You're in luck.
It's good.
So I don't know how those two things relate to each other.
I'm sure many a teenage boy has thought of that joke.
Yeah, does Wallace have a lot of kind of teenage boy humor in this book, would you say?
I think he nails some of it with the Tennis Academy kids, as Amy called them, the little shits.
Oh, such little fuckers. Am I allowed to say that here?
We can put a little red E next to each episode if we have explicit
that
content.
Moment about them and the eschaton debacle and just everything they do. When poor... Who's it? Orthostice gets his tongue stuck to the window.
His forehead to the window.
His forehead, and nobody cares. Just little bastards.
Just like, get some warm water.
I know.
Why isn't anyone getting some warm water?
Yeah, that's what I kept thinking.
Rip it off.
Too.
This is a terrible
Hal's
idea.
just behind him, like Heimlich style, like just ready to reef his forehead skin off, and
like that is such a short-sighted adolescent like behavioral thing to do. Like, I don't want to say exclusively boy, but like it is like an adolescent boy thing to be like, we'll just rip your forehead skin off.
This way.
Rather than,
it'll toughen you up,
lukewarm water, and we'll just frost it. Oh man.
Yeah. Truly. Okay, so we got some kids at Anna House who are standout. So Rachel, you mentioned Don Gately as a favorite character.
Yeah.
What is it about him that particularly was compelling?
I think it's a tough one to answer. I don't know. I found his story to be, I think, just like is very real. This idea of like someone who has gone through a lot of shit and then has hit his rock bottom at some point and is trying to figure out how to move forward from there in a way that's authentic and honest. And I think like this genuine kind of this real struggle between like his desire to truly help people and help others, but kind of not giving himself enough credit in that desire, and not always viewing it as altruistic, but this kind of self-salvation, that he needs to be doing these things in order to continue to his own path of redemption. And I think the way that he viewed himself was very it just really rang true for the way I think that we often consider ourselves. We sort of discredit the things that are actually really upstanding or, you know, moralistic or whatever about ourselves as like not true, not honest, but I think actually they are. I don't know, I feel I'm articulating it very well, but I found just his character to be very interesting, and I wanted to know more about where he was going from there, and just the way that he internally processed things and reflects on things, and kind of just keeps plodding along.
Yeah, he does definitely plod, doesn't he? With his big square head. Amy, you came up a couple episodes ago in the context of Avril Incandenza being at least at about the quarter halfway point of the novel being your favorite character so far. And the person I was talking to at the time, Samantha Wallace, was like, "Well, how far into the book is she?" I was like, "She's not done yet." She's like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." So what is it about Avril that you found?
The part that made me like, "Yep, you're the best," was the part, I think, someone found a letter she had written, or Oren had a letter she had written or something to the grammaticians, like her grammar club.
The Militant Grammarians of Massachusetts.
That's it. I was sitting in JJ Bean and I was laughing out loud. I had to text you right away. And she's like, I can't. This is the best. This is so funny. So I really like Avril. I really liked her manners. Like, she eats so late and weird. And
yes, the Canadian thing. The
way she interacts with her children is so strange. I just generally found her very kooky and charming. Less so when we found out some of her behaviors with John Wayne.
Yeah,
sure.
But
or even her half brother. What is the relation?
Charles Tavis.
Yeah,
which we're not entirely sure whether it's like a Richie Margot Tenenbaum situation where they're like half, you know, like adopted, or if they're actually half, or I think it's kind of ambiguous if I'm remembering correctly. So it's kind of a bit sketchy though.
It's still either way a bit questionable.
And I think there's strong evidence to suggest that Charles Taves is Mario's father, right? So
there's some weird stuff.
Yeah, she's not perfect, but
it also seems like her and Oren have had some kind of tryst as well, which is very Oedipal.
Her and Oren have had a tryst?
Yeah, there's some stuff in there that seems to indicate mother,
Oren
son.
was not my favorite.
Oren was not my favorite either, but I didn't pick up on that at all, actually. Yeah, I knew that
there's
he
a couple
had
subtle moments
falling out, but
Joelle hints at it.
I think so, yeah.
I thought she just kind of hinted at the fact that it was a bizarre relationship, and he sort of held her to like this on this pedestal that Joelle was uncomfortable with, but it deserves a second reading just for that alone, I guess.
We'll come back to the idea of second readings at the end. What do you guys make of Hal's ending? What happens to Hal? This is a big question for a lot of people.
Like Hal's ending beginning?
Well, sure, that could be part of it. So in hindsight, you now know that the opening scene of Infinite Jest is actually the ending.
Yeah.
Right.
More or less. So what do you make of that scene where he's at the University of Arizona and he has what appears to be some kind of psychological break? Some people read it as a moment of almost rebirth, that he's now freed from the shackles of like capitalist, like academia, all these strictures of the tennis academy. One of my supervisors kind of took that reading, and I was like, I don't think that's where I'm going with my interpretation of that, but
it just made me think a lot of the Metamorphosis. You know, that short story about the bug?
Kafka.
Yeah.
The bug.
All I kept thinking about
into the bug.
Like this nonsense situation that
or even the convalescent.
Yeah, very, very similar there. And Wallace writes a fair bit about Kafka in some of his nonfiction essays, and he's a big Kafka fan. So he's certainly indebted to him on some levels. So I'm sure there's influence there.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I just chalked it up to the DMZ.
Okay, yeah. Maybe it's something I ate. The DMX.
I wish they had gotten to that part where they got to try it. I really wanted to see what insanity would ensue when him and Pemulus and Alston, who's the other one?
Oh, Trevor Axford, I think, maybe?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. If I'm remembering correctly. It's something of a struggle to keep all these characters straight.
But now don't see. Okay, so I'm kind of hazy on the details. But what is it that John Wayne has? Is it DMZ or is it something else?
No, he took something else.
When he gets on the PA and starts.
Which I also want to hear so
I know,
bad.
I want to know the details of what he was saying so much.
Yeah, there's some reference to it. It's quite funny.
Yeah, but what was it that they gave him, or that he got, or had?
Man, I don't remember what pharmacological thing it was.
I think it was just Reg's stuff.
It was other stuff. Okay. Yeah.
Peddling.
Because it was kind of like he was having some sort of episode, right? Like stimulant-induced episode or whatever. But so I just was, and I can't quite remember what it was. So I was thinking, well, if he had the same thing that Hal had, and that was the reading, just like the difference in.
Did someone slip something in his food or his drink? I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's implied that he.
Right.
Or that he's snooping through someone's room and he finds something.
For John Wayne, I think it's implied that he takes it because he was taking Advil. He had a headache or something. He was trying to take an Advil. I don't think someone slipped it to him.
He found something and he thought it was like...
or it was in an Advil bottle or something.
Right.
Listeners are going to be like, you guys are...
Just read the book again, dummies.
I mean, I've read the book. I've read the book 3 times, and there's still a lot of details that are, hazy. Yeah. For sure. The book is very pharmacological, though. There's a lot about drugs, and which is cool for you, Amy, because you're studying
really
medicine
interesting
right now.
And really helpful.
Yeah.
That made me think of how there's probably so many parts of this book that are interesting, and you feel like your educational background helps you understand it better, because there's probably tons of parts that I kind of just breezed through and didn't even notice of these like hidden treasures in it, but because I understood the pharmacological language, it was extra interesting.
Yeah. My sister is reading it right now, and she's about a third or 2/5 of the way through, and she's a nurse, so she is like loving all the stuff about
the
drugs.
Beginning especially.
Because she's like, I understand what all of these words mean, and I feel really smart. I may not get like a lot of other stuff that's going on, but at least I have a leg up in this department.
Yeah, I did not have a leg up in that.
No, me neither.
I just scanned and was like, this is not registering. I'm not plugging any of this in.
If I reference the endnotes, I was like, I already knew that.
Oh yeah, because you knew like what the drug stood for or whatever.
You didn't need to spell that out for me.
Gosh,
I'm practically a doctor, so whatever. So we talked about favorite characters. Were there any characters that were particularly loathsome to you, like least favorite? So you mentioned Oren.
Old.
I had a real hard time with Lens.
Real hard time. Their Lens.
Yeah, Lens is particularly despicable. I would agree with that.
Yeah, I did though. Interestingly, that Gately was your favorite. It took me probably, I don't know, at least the halfway point, like after we'd gotten a fair bit into Gately's story, to start enjoying them. So the first one I thought was funny and interesting and like obviously sad, but
like where he kills Maurice Duplessis by accident. Accidental manslaughter is what Matt has called it before on the show.
That was kooky and interesting. Then probably the next couple chunks of his stuff, I was just kind of like, okay, move along. I want to get back to the other parts of the story. But then I got super into his storyline, so I wasn't a huge fan of Gately's until later.
So Gately grew on you.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Is it Gately?
That's how I say it.
There's an E in there, so I've always heard Gately.
I guess so.
I made actually a small argument
learned it here.
in my thesis about his name being significant, theologically significant, the gate.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so...
I don't know if there's others that I particularly disliked. I wasn't a huge fan of Johnny Gentle.
Okay.
Even though he's not in there a lot.
Kenny Crew.
I think just because
he's pretty funny, right?
I feel like in this...
Swinging that mic. Amy's making a swinging microphone with like sassy hips right now.
Just his poor leadership and the destruction of the country and surrounding. I just think it's too close to home right now.
It is close to home right now. That's true.
I think I'm just kind of like, Trump. I don't know. Maybe this would be funny if it wasn't possibly the reality.
It was written 20 years ago, so Wallace seems to anticipate some of the Trumpism that's happening right now.
Yeah, I think I found him stressful. I wasn't that I disliked him. I found him stressful.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
And you guys also being both Canadian-born citizens,
there's a lot of stuff about Canada in this book, and a lot of stuff about Canada getting really particularly hosed over by Johnny Gentle and his policies. How do you read this book as a Canadian? What are some things was there anything particularly that you found awesome that you could understand particularly well, having lived in this country your whole life?
The stuff on the separatist movement was interesting because it's not like a history story we have to learn again. So that was another place where you feel like, I can follow along. Yeah. Poor Wallace must have been an expert in everything.
Yeah, like I really wonder what his research was for Canada, because he's very well versed in the regional particulars of Canadian culture. Like the Alberta terrorists are like these fundamentalist conservative wackos.
Yeah. So funny.
And their idea of terrorism is like blowing up, setting off an explosion on like a farm in Montana. And that is pretty funny to us. Yeah. Because we're very close to Alberta, and we sort of hold some aspects of Alberta to be fairly humorous to us as people from BC.
But yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, I think it was also like, that is what would happen to Canada. Like,
we'd kind of roll over.
Not entirely wrong there.
We would try our best to stand up, but at the end of the day, like, we're not a military power. We're traditionally peacemakers, and so
pretty small population base.
We would try to appease, we would try to like negotiate, and then eventually we would be on the wrong side of great concavity.
Yeah, we'd be on the convexity side. Yeah, firmly so. So we talked a little bit at the start about sort of the politics of representation in this novel around how does Wallace portray female characters and how does he portray ethnic characters. And so there's some pretty cringy stuff in here. It's a book from 96, so we consider sort of the historical moment that it came out. But some of the stuff around, like, I think Clonette Henderson and some of the other African-American characters, like Poor Tony and C, the whole Ebonics section we were talking about earlier today. I mean, what do you guys, with the backgrounds that you have, how did you respond to some of those things in the book? What do you make of Wallace's takes on them?
I think for me it was definitely one of my least favorite components. Like, I think I had to kind of have a forgiving eye towards parts, and I think part of that is I think like Wallace hits so many things on the nose, like ahead of his time in terms of technology and politics and all these other things that get talked about. And so in a way I expect more from him, even though it's a product of the era. Still, mid-90s, like I expect more around representation and thoughtfulness around that. So I think there's some elements around you were writing a character, and the characters have certain perspective and lived experience, and they will have their own biases, and that's fair. And then there's other elements where I think it could have been done in a more thoughtful and considered way. I feel like I'm speaking to people who are gonna like burn me at the stake for
you're actually really on point, because a book just came out called The Unspeakable Failures of David Foster Wallace by Claire Hayes Brady, and we're gonna have her on pretty soon. I've been reading through it, and one of her chapters is on Wallace and gender, and she's got a few bones to pick with how Wallace portrays the female. And on the read, there's a read right now over the summer called Poor York Summer. It's Canadians who are leading it, and Claire just submitted a post the other day, and she talked about gender representation in the novel.
I'd love to.
And that she's got some, she's got a few issues with how Wallace writes about the female from the female voice.
Yeah, there really aren't any women that you want to root for at all. Like, the way he talks about the girls at the tennis academy is pretty heartbreaking.
And Kitten Plant, the USS Millicent Kent.
Yeah, not great.
I was rooting for Joelle.
What about Joelle?
One of my favorite characters.
I would say she's maybe strongest.
Deeply flawed, but one of my favorites. And I think that's partly because she was one of the only female characters that I could connect with. Like, Avril is kind of, she's there, but she's not a fixture in the same way, like, and she is more of a caricature in a way, like, I don't know, like, and whereas Joelle, you learn a bit more about her, and she's kind of more fully formed, but still not in the way that of male characters. So I was rooting for her, and I wanted more for Joelle than what she got.
Yeah, Joelle wasn't my favorite. I think I didn't not like her, but I didn't feel a sense of like really connecting with the character. But I also didn't love the way they, and maybe this is just my reading of it, but I found that all along, because she's got her veil on, I feel like all along we were leading up to her actually just being so beautiful that she had to be veiled, which is kind of like I felt like was a little bit simple and not really. But then that's also just my reading of it, because I didn't know what actually happened. But because all along you see her as this most beautiful person in, what did Oren call her? The Peagoat, the prettiest girl
of all time.
Yeah. Right. So she's just this most beautiful person, and that's her like defining quality is her beauty, and that's all we really hear about her. But
I totally expected that it was that she was too beautiful and she was tired of like being viewed through that lens. So it was really interesting in the end when you realize it was the acid attack or whatever.
Yeah.
That, like,
So that part's interesting because Molly Notkin is narrating it, which is the girl who hosts the party where Joelle wants to have too much fun.
Yeah.
Just kind of her last hurrah. But Molly Notkin is maybe not necessarily a reliable narrator. A lot of people have drawn attention to that. So it's like, and it's kind of mediated through like Oren's telling of this story of the acid. So did it seem clear to you guys that that's really what happened?
Or did
it seem like possibly not the case?
I guess I took it at face value. Pun not intended.
Oops, delete that part.
But I mean, that's a good point too. Like it's not reliable, so it could have been something different. Yeah.
There are so many terrible, terrible scenes of awful parents.
Yes, that seems to be a recurring motif in the book, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very bleak.
Yeah.
It's one of the critiques around, just to, like, I mean, I would like to read this, is one of the critiques around female representation. Like, basically I feel like, I mean, Wallace really focuses on, like, the physical for most, like, he is descriptive in certain ways around each of the, but, you know, Joelle is described as being, like, the prettiest girl ever. Avril is strikingly beautiful. Like, you know, all the women that Oren dates are beautiful. Helen Steepley,
and single mothers.
I'm single.
Helen Steepley,
maybe not so much so, but it's also a man dressed up. So, like, is that part of it too? It's like you have significance or value if you're really beautiful in a way. Like, I don't know. Otherwise, you're kind of pushed to the side and you're just made mention of. Like, it's not, you're not carrying as much worth or something.
Oh, that's
I don't
interesting.
know.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of that too much before, but I just kind of thought about the fact that really seems to be a fixture for both Avril and Joelle anyways.
That's true.
Or a defining characteristic, which is unfortunate because
you know who I really did like, I thought was represented nicely, was I can't remember her name, but
Lateral Alice Moore?
No, I was pretty into that. Gately's boss at the...
Pat Montesian.
Yeah. I liked her a lot.
Yeah,
me too.
She's great.
Salt the earth, people. Just getting the job done.
Yeah, with her face kind of half.
Yeah.
Seems like she's got a bit of a rough life going on for herself, but
yeah.
But a cool car.
Pretty cool car. I liked her too.
Yeah.
Nice. Is there any percentage of you guys that wants to read this book again?
Oh yeah, I definitely want to read it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I plan to read it again for sure.
You do?
Yeah. And next time will be, I think, easier on a timeline because, well, obviously I read it really quickly because of being out of school, but reading it a second time won't feel like you have to read it quite as quickly. I think the little treasures that you don't notice the first time because you are still trying to figure out who these characters are and what's going on, those will come regardless. So I think it would be very easy to read just as a casual train read.
Right.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I probably won't read it again for a year at least. Like, I think I want to give some space for it. But I look forward to revisiting it, which so rarely happens with books, especially one that you think, oh good God, if I can get through this one, so I'll be happy with it.
Accomplished something already.
You should get some kind of degree for this or a certificate.
Certainly a certificate, if nothing else. Medal?
A medal, yes, with a ribbon, like
just
a blue ribbon.
I think we should produce buttons that just say something like, I got through.
It's like the I gave blood for the first time sticker.
Or like first
I
time
read
Disneyland
Infinite Jest for the first time.
Do you get through the lineups quicker that way?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'll tell you, you don't get through the lineups quicker if it's your birthday.
You don't?
No. Oh, but every employee wishes you happy birthday all day.
How do they know?
Because you wear a pin that says, I'm Amy, it's my birthday.
Oh, nice.
I think the Great Concavity should start producing those buttons. You can.
Oh, that's a good idea. We could get our friend Chris Ayers to make them.
Yeah.
Because he's made buttons for Wallace.
Buttons. Yeah. I've read Infinite Jest.
People can write in and say, I've successfily completed it, and you just take them at their word.
Or ask them a few quiz questions.
Oh, sure.
Sure. We can have like a poll, an online. Yeah. I can run a filter for them and make sure they've actually done it, and then we'll send them a button.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea. Chris Ayers, our friend, recently. Have you guys seen the Shia LaBeouf "Just Do It" video online, which has a funny backstory? And I thought it'd be amazing if there could be Infinite Jest in the background of that. And so I texted him and I was like, hey, you know how to do these kinds of internet things. Could you put Infinite Jest in the background? And later that day or the next day, he sent me a link with Shia LaBeouf, Just Do It. And we posted it on our Instagram and stuff. So
yeah, I think we've both seen that video.
I would have really enjoyed it at about page like 110.
Yeah,
would have been really
that would have given you a good kick in the pants.
Yeah,
that's great. Have you guys read some books since Infinite Jest? And I love asking people this question because in my experience reading it for the first time, I felt like books that I read after were just very lackluster. Just in comparison to this really huge universe that I just kind of traversed through. What has it been like reading books since? Have you had a similar experience, or do you just kind of chalk it up to like, they're just doing different things, so...
It took me a few books. Like, I read a handful. I finished in May, so I've read some books since then. I think I read Us Conductors and All the Light We Cannot See. Both of which I don't know if before reading Infinite Jest I would have been that into anyways, but I felt very meh about them. Like, it definitely felt lackluster.
Not like paying out on those authors or anything, but like...
Sure, you want to edit that part out? Because like disparaging. I'm sure they're not going to be offended that Rachel Laird from Canada didn't really like them much. They both did very well. So, and then I think after reading those two, I read... Jesse's Homegoing, which was new out I think in June, and I loved that. That was sort of like reconnection into there can be books after Infinite Jest that are incredibly different, but just super invigorating to read. And then since then I've had some hit and misses, but I did just read The Convalescent, which was awesome and very engaging. And I've just finished a Spanish language novel that's been translated to English called Signs Preceding the End of the World. And I think the author is Yuri Herrera, if I'm remembering correctly. And so that was very good as well. Very brief, but really good. So there is literary life after Infinite Jest, but it feels like it took a little while to get there.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, I found kind of the same thing, but I don't know if before Infinite Jest, if I would have read a book and really thought that deeply about like, what is this doing on a literary level? Like, so I don't know if I would have read these books in an entirely different way before, or if I would have not liked them anyways. Like, I don't really know, but I read, and nothing I read after I didn't like, but I read Americana, which I really enjoyed, but maybe I would have liked it more. I don't know. But then I also read like Girl on a Train, which I didn't like. Read the new Harry Potter book. I read a 6th century British historical fiction, which I loved. Like, I'm now reading science fiction about a used bookstore. Like, there's...
Oh, yeah, the Penumbra's.
Yeah.
Right. Dr. Penumbra's...
Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore.
Which
is very charming. But not... doesn't challenge me. So,
in the same literary ways that...
Yeah. So, I don't know if I'm still maybe... Because I only finished 3 weeks ago? Like, not very long ago. So maybe I'm still readjusting to the world of books. As of 2 days from now, my world of books will consist only of medical textbooks again. So hopefully,
it's certainly nice to be able to like read a book and know. Like, I read science pretending in the world on like a short flight, you know, like
like in an hour and a half or whatever.
and just be like, I can finish this in a week, like and enjoy it and not have all the daunting work that's ahead of you with Infinite Jest. It is nice to have that as a relief.
Definitely.
But it is weird feeling like, well, I've read Infinite Jest, which is like the work of literature for the 20th century, I feel like. So then, like, what do I do now? I'm not reading Anna Karenina. I'm not. I'm not reading War and Peace.
Tolstoy's not going to scratch the right itch for you.
So I'm lost. I'm lost in the literary world.
Dave has suggested The Instructions by
Adam Levine. It's that big white one over there.
It's massive as well.
Also hefty,
It's not nearly as dense or challenging, I would say, as Infinite Jest. Like in terms of timeline and things like that, it demands less of you, but it is profoundly entertaining and hilarious, and I love it. It's probably my second favorite novel.
I feel like you've made a lot of literary jokes that no one understands except for you about that book.
Oh yeah, loads.
Okay.
Like I think like, you know, anyone who is living in Victoria wants to like Bogart Wi-Fi, you can basically just try different words from the instructions or Infinite Jest.
I broke your Wi-Fi today.
Did you really?
You did. Oh yeah, because our network name is We Damage We.
Which is the instructions.
Which is from the instructions, and our password is Howling Phantods.
Yeah, although now we have to change it because you've just put it on the...
No one's going to find it. And
the neighbors aren't listening to this podcast.
Congratulations. Let's hang out and have a beer or something. Come on in, hang out.
That's so true.
So you guys have heard me talk about David Foster Wallace for about a decade and just not really shut up about him, which I'm sure has been annoying. But hopefully now you can understand a little bit of my obsession. Would you guys say that this book lives up to the hype that I've hyped it to, or approaches the hype?
Yes. Like I really didn't expect it to. That's why I didn't tell you for the first 250 pages or so, because I thought like, I am not going to be the person that reads the book you love, hates it, and then tells you how much I hate it. Like, that just feels very mean.
And so it's like, why would you spend 3 years doing a master's on this book?
Yeah. Oh, your life's work? Oh, I think it's garbage. So I didn't want to tell you. But by the time I got to the point where I knew I was going to finish, I was pretty invested. So yeah, I would say it actually does live up to a decade of jokes I didn't understand and journal publishings and various things you did. So
absolutely. I definitely feel like anyone who's kind of tells me they're thinking of reading this book now, I'm like, absolutely do it. Like it's so worth it. It does live up to it. And also just, know what you're getting yourself into. Like, don't think it's going to be a breeze.
Yeah. So you wouldn't recommend it to like the casual YA fiction only reader?
Well, let's not knock YA.
Only. I said only. I'm qualifying that statement.
I think who I wouldn't recommend it to is someone who loves to just be carried along by plot and kind of like, candy narrative, like sort of, like it's sort of just reading to be purely entertained. And this is not that kind of a book. And so I think if you want to read it, that's amazing, and then just know that you're going to have to work at it for a while, and that it does reward. Like I always tell people, it's the most rewarding read, but it's because you work for it that it's rewarding. So
yeah, I really like the intro from the version I had. It has a Dave Eggers intro, and he says that this book will make you a better reader. And when I read that, I was really excited to read the book. Also wasn't really sure how he meant that. After finishing, I think it makes a lot more sense. So,
in what way?
I think I read books in an entirely different way now. I think I read them probably paying attention to things I wouldn't have paid attention to, noticing literary decisions the author makes. I would always have noticed grammar, but I think I maybe
You're a bit of a snoot?
I am definitely a grammar snoot.
You're real Avril.
I love an Oxford comma. I have no patience
babysit me
for an Oxford comma done in error.
Yeah. You gotta have that comma, guys. It just alleviates so much ambiguity.
That and M dash. I love a good, well-used M dash.
Totally.
Yeah.
You're not a fan of brackets either in academic writing.
I do not like brackets.
The parentheses.
No.
Parenthetical remarks
I know you do like them.
I do like them, and when Amy edits my papers, she takes them all out. which makes me better for it.
Then you just have to go back and put them back in.
No, I don't. I don't. It's laziness on my part, I think, that puts them in there in the first place. So it's good. Make me a better writer.
Nice. Thanks for that, Amy. That's good.
Sure.
Any final thoughts on Infinite Jest, David Foster Wallace, where you go from here in the Wallace canon? Any plans to read anything else by him?
I actually don't have plans to read anything else by him.
Everything and More. A book about infinity.
Yeah, totally.
Is that another one?
Maybe
the
rap book? What is that
Signifying
one?
Rappers?
Signifying Rappers,
yeah. That one's fun.
Yeah.
I don't want to read a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again. Mm-hmm. Mostly because I love cruises.
Yeah, don't read it.
And I feel like I don't need that ruined for me. Thanks, Wallace. But I would like to read maybe Consider the Lobster.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really have any interest in Pale King.
You've said that.
Yeah, and
your mom read it recently.
My mom read it before she read Infinite Jest, if I remember correctly, just right before, and she certainly liked Infinite Jest better. I think a lot of people do, but she really enjoyed The Pale King too, and thought he nailed the tedium of the everyday life
adult work life.
Adult life.
And she's been at it a bit longer than we have.
And I guess I just don't feel like I need to look at the tedium of adult life.
A reminder of
really
the tedium ahead of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, I don't know. I don't have any plans to, but that doesn't mean I won't. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Amy, for swinging by.
Are you going to ask us if we have any advice for first-time readers?
Oh, yeah. Well, that could be a final thought.
Okay. You can edit around
Do
this.
you have... No, I won't.
Please don't do. You have to.
This is a glimpse into our marriage.
No.
Do you have any advice for first-time readers?
Oh boy. I think following a reading schedule, probably really good. I didn't, because I had the luxury of not needing to. But I certainly, when I read the first 150 or so pages well before finishing the rest, I was trying to follow the Infinite Winter schedule and failing miserably, but at least there was like an effort there, and I felt like, okay, I just need to read like another 5 pages this week. That's fine. It'll be fine. So I think that is very, very useful if you are trying to get through it.
Yeah.
Also, go back and like find the treasures. Like, I didn't give myself as much time, I think, as I should have to go back and search those things and name connections. And those are really fun to see the connections of where stories line up, not just being in a rush to finish.
Yeah.
And read all the endnotes.
And read the endnotes.
All the endnotes.
Absolutely crucial.
I will admit I didn't read all the
filmography.
filmography. I read it after because I thought perhaps there'd be some fun little treats in there. Yeah. But the first read through, because it's only like endnote like 30 or something.
Yeah, it's pretty early.
So you don't even really know who the characters are yet, or what the timeline, or like how. I don't think you know how James and Cadenza died yet. But I read it after, and then it was fun.
Oh yeah. Did you go back and reread the Hal's intro after you finished the book?
I didn't.
You didn't?
No.
It's pretty interesting, actually.
Like,
a few things are like really will jump out to you. Like, oh, okay. Like, there's that mention of him and Gately in the graveyard digging up James Incandenza's head. Yeah. Which is, for Hal at that point, it's a memory. But then later in the book, Gately has a dream or a vision about that, which would, at that point, would be in his future. Yeah. And then John Wayne's there in a mask, and what's going on? So
John Wayne.
Do you guys think so? There's a theory that John Wayne is a member of the AFR, or he's working as like an agent of the AFR, to work towards getting out the Samizdat and destroy America.
Would that mean Avril maybe is also?
That is a possible implication, I think. Which is interesting because she was married to James Incandenza, who made it. So there's a few questions.
That would be pretty badass if that was Avril.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there collusion with her and James?
Yeah, potentially.
I mean, it doesn't seem like that was his intent making the film. No. It was mostly to communicate with Hal, who'd been, escaping to the periphery of life's frame. Yeah. Which she seems to do at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Sage advice for the first-time reader?
I echo Amy. About the schedule. I wrote out the Infinite Winter time frame
on a piece of paper,
on a piece of index card, a recipe index card, and I used that as my bookmark. So as I was reading, I would tick off at the end of each week the page number that I should be at. So it was like a really nice reminder of how I was progressing through the book and what speed I was doing. I think what I would do next time is I would write out the year as well and put that on the index card and keep that so that you don't have to flip back to it every single time. You can just keep it as a quick reference. I would probably even end up taking notes of like big events, what year they happened in, so as you read through them, so that you are kind of like, when you're like, oh wait, when was that this thing happened, you could sort of see it in like quick reference. For sure, reading all the end notes, like
who was it we were talking to that didn't read the end notes?
Well, Dave's mom started reading the book and she was like,
she did not finish.
She did not finish. She called it quits pretty early on, but she said, oh, I looked at some of the end notes and I just thought they were too long, so I didn't read them. And I was with Dave's sister too. We're like, so did you skip the whole like AFR train thing about why they're in wheelchairs? Oh yeah, that doesn't sound familiar. You cannot skip the end notes. Like, it's crucial information. It will not make story. It's not like a luxury to read them. It's a necessity to read them. I can't even imagine that you would try.
So funny.
Yeah.
And reading with someone else is really nice too. Like I read the beginning bit with one friend who's still trucking along. She's gonna get there.
Yeah. Tash.
Yeah. And then it was really nice, though Rachel had already finished it. As I was going through, there were people to talk to about it. So reading it with someone I think is very helpful.
Have a wingman.
Yeah, you gotta have a wing woman. A wing person.
Wing person. Sure. Let's not be binary here.
A wing individual.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great talking to you about what it's like to read this book for the first time. And I mean, you're not really on the social media things all that much, so
no, you can't find me.
You can find me nowhere.
I will not be found.
Or we are unsearchable on the internet,
basically. Yes.
Cool.
On LinkedIn or something.
So if they want to get in touch with you,
find me on LinkedIn.
or you can send an email to us at concavityshow@gmail.com and be like, hey Dave, pass on this message to Rachel or Amy or both.
Sure, as long as they're nice.
You guys are usually close by. We've never had like a mad or
someone getting mad about your interpretation.
There's never been an email that's been negative, so we have the best listeners ever because they're cool to us. So thanks for being cool, guys.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
It's great.
Well, thanks for having us on.
Yeah,
it was
my pleasure.
More fun and less painful than I thought.
Oh, good. Yeah.
About as fun and is going to be twice as embarrassing when I listen to this recording.
It's always very painful to hear yourself back on recording, and after 20 episodes I'm now just starting to kind of be okay with it. I've gotten used to it enough when I re-edit everything every time, but it's a hurdle. It's a massive hurdle to get over, for sure.
I may never listen to this episode.
That's okay.
I might just trust your judgment that you put it out there and you treated us well. Didn't include anything around. That we said, make sure you edit that part out.
All right, guys. Thanks again. It's been a blast.